I also kind of have to wonder if we had no knowledge at all of the history of dogs, if we were starting over in a knowledge vacuum and had to relearn everything from scratch, would scientists consider like a Labrador and a Chihuahua to even be the same species if they didn't have that background knowledge to know how we arrived at those?
Yeah, certainly, because they look vastly different, and quite frankly, they're
Certainly,
barely the same.
certainly, like a Labrador and a Chihuahua are technically the same species, while like say I don't know, I'm really bad about my dog breeds. Like a husky and a coyote, maybe not a husky, but like there's a lot of dog breeds that look an awful lot like a coyote, but a coyote is
Yeah.
a distinct, separate species. So, like, two animals that scientists universally agree are the same species can look much different when compared side by side to two animals that scientists all agree are not the same species.
Yeah. Well, I guess like you're saying to where like the husky looks, if you were to compare a husky to like a wolf, like if
Yeah,
we are to say, scientifically speaking, all dogs are descended from wolves, right? A Chihuahua looks nothing like a wolf, but if you were to take a
right,
husky, it looks closer to a wolf than a
right.
Chihuahua certainly does.
And actually, all dogs being descended from wolves is something that I've heard in the scientific community. So, to some extent, even scientists kind of buy into this. But all that to go back to what I originally said about how Christians need to be careful not to just completely reject everything about evolution lest we look ignorant. That's kind of what I'm talking about is like we can disagree on the conclusions that Darwin drew from what he saw when he visited the Galapagos Islands. And I think as Christians, we probably should disagree with the conclusions that he drew. But we can't deny that when he was in the Galapagos, he saw a bunch of different finches that had beaks that were well suited for eating different types of food. And that probably came from some other earlier ancestral finch, because all of the finches would be very similar, except for in that one specific survival trait. And that really just comes down to like the ones that were born with beaks that weren't good for eating the food where they lived just didn't live long enough to make more finches. And so that's the whole idea of evolution. And that is that's not something that we should be trying to deny, because we can see that happen where animal that is born with some kind of physical characteristic that makes it harder to survive where it lives just isn't likely to live long enough to reproduce.
Right.
What else? Yeah, so I think really what it comes down to in terms of evolution and how evolution plays into the origins of the Earth and the universe is how much randomness can we accept as reasonable? Because this is kind of the big argument, and I think I can get to the big point now and not feel like we're dry on content. So I would argue that the idea that everything was completely random requires more faith than any of the like mainstream Christian ideas of the origin of the universe. Um I can be a brother in Christ with someone who like buys into the earth being billions of years old but believes that God was guiding the process every step of the way to arrive where we arrived. In terms of my faith and in terms of my sense of logic, I can jive with that. That's cool. What I can't jive with from either a faith or a logic perspective is that we got where we are just completely at random because there's just so much about the earth that is incredibly unlikely
Yeah.
that it just like we would need more time than what even like the secular theories of the origin of the universe allow us. One of the things that secular scientists agree on is that among the known universe, the Earth is an absolute anomaly in terms of how uniquely well suited it is to supporting carbon based life. It has lots of water. It's just the right distance from its main star to like not be too hot, not be too cold.
Goldilocks principle.
So, yeah. Side note, a commonly touted thing that I've heard at pulpits at several churches is that if the Earth was just a little bit farther from the sun, we'd freeze, and if it was a little closer, we'd burn up. I don't like that story because like the Earth is not a uniform distance from the sun. Like even during the course of the year, the Earth moves closer and farther from the sun. So,
yeah.
Side note, I don't like that little metaphor that I hear so much that I've heard at the pulpit at several churches. But anyway, there's a range, right? And the Earth falls nicely into that range at all points in its orbit. Let's assume that through a series of complete evolutionary accidents, life formed on Earth, intelligent life formed on Earth, and was achieved during the relatively brief time period that conditions are right. Because that's the other thing, too. The secular scientific idea of the Earth being billions of years old, there's a fairly narrow window in terms of geologic time in which the Earth is going to sustain life. A point will come when the Earth can't sustain life anymore, and a point early in its existence, it wasn't suited for life. So, not only do we have to have this series of random accidents that takes primordial ooze to humans, it also has to happen during this extremely tight window of opportunity. And now, on top of that, also note that this highly unusual planet with the exceptionally unlikely, coupled with the exceptional unlikelihood that intelligent life forms by accident, happens to be, and I'm gonna put a date on when I wrote my notes here, because this was very topical when I wrote my notes. It happens to be the only planet in the known universe with the right conditions for total solar eclipses to happen. We are the only planet in the known universe who has a sun and a moon that are exactly the right size and exactly the right distance that total solar eclipses happen. The reason that happens is our sun is almost exactly 400 times larger than the moon. It's also almost exactly 400 times farther away. So they just like, when they pass by each other, they perfectly cancel out.
Yeah.
Solar eclipses are actually pretty important because it's one of those things that I view as like God showing off. Because this was God giving us an opportunity to learn about the sun that helps us, that allows our planet to sustain life. The only reason we know about like the corona of the sun is because you can see it during a total solar eclipse.
Yeah.
Like, I mean, we might have known about it like by now had that not happened, but like the only reason that they knew about the corona of the sun 3,000 years ago is because of total solar eclipses giving us the exact right conditions once in a blue moon to observe it. That is just amazing. And so that's yet another insane cosmological accident that has to stack up with these other insane cosmological accidents. And so I see all of that stuff put together and I think, okay, which of these is more likely? There's a divine, all-powerful creator who orchestrated the events just exactly the right way to make all this stuff happen, or exactly the right series of extremely improbable accidents all happened together at exactly the right time. Like,
yeah.
Which one of these needs more faith?
100. I agree with that because it's really, it's kind of insane when you think about it, because like they really push that like the conditions were just right at every single point in time, that like, and we just skirt it by in this like 0.01% chance. I'm just making up a number here, but like, you know, like it's wild because but that's what the majority would believe, because that's what the science says, and they're like, well, I guess that's what the science says, and it's almost sorry.
And I think this is kind of a symptom of a bigger problem that is a result of the curse of sin. I think people have, because of our sin nature, a kind of built-in desire to try to eliminate the need for God. And so I think that's where, like, I think it really just came down to Darwin found a shred of evidence right? That gives him an out to explain away how we got here without a need for God. And the scientific community kind of ran with it, partially because it's kind of all they got.
Yeah.
I certainly think we could have a discussion all day long about like which religion is right. I'm not so willing to. Obviously, I have my faith, I have my beliefs, so like I will hand wave away other beliefs, but I wouldn't hand wave away some other religion's story of creation just on the merits that I think it's patently absurd, in the same way that I would wave away this series of insane random accidents. Obviously, I do believe that our creation story is the correct one, but I wouldn't necessarily say that other creation stories are as patently absurd as the secular version of the origins of humanity.
Yeah, I could agree with that because, like you said, it's almost like there's this innate desire to eliminate, the one true God. And I think that's spoken about in scripture, where like Ephesians chapter 2, it talks about like you were dead in your trespasses, following the prince of the power of the air, you were following the world, and the world said, you know, is irrelevant, right? At the very least, doesn't exist. But even if it does, he's irrelevant. To be intellectual is to throw that away. We're better than that. We have all this technology now. We know that, oh, they were casting out demons. These people were just epileptic. Like, it's looked down upon to have this faith because science says otherwise, and because of the science, you're refusing to change individual. But again, I think that's where it is, kind of circling back to the beginning. It's one of those stereotypes and misconceptions about Christianity. I can respect science in the regard that, like, again, planes, trains, automobiles, like, there are clear things, clear technological advances that we can see, germ theory that exists, that make logical sense, visibly can be seen, but that doesn't change the fact that that randomness, they say, it does make sense. At that point, we're going so far back to where like you are just guessing in and almost to the point where you're no longer just guessing in the dark. You're specifically trying to disprove God and latching on to like the very first thing that makes sense. Is like, oh, see, can't be a God. Like we've just did, the best that we in our environment. Like why would we need God for that? And it's like, yeah, that's not. I could, like you said, kind of wave that away, and move, because I have my faith, and my faith said that I was specifically created, and that makes more sense with intelligent design and things like that, and that all these processes in place only really make sense if someone put them in place, not this randomness that developed.
Yep, and certainly, I can break bread as a Christian with people who believe in like all of the things the secular scientists purport, but as a like process that God had his hands in every step in the way. And I can break bread with Christians who believe that God created the earth in 6 literal 24-hour days. And neither one of those ideas require the same kind of level of faith. And even young earth creationism, like there's some ideas that kind of can make young earth creationism work even with how old the earth appears to be. Like, the example I like to give is Adam and Eve clearly were created as adults, not infants, which means God is capable of creating things that are already mature and developed. So if God can create 2 humans that are just adults from the moment they are created, God can certainly create an earth that has all of the exact right evidence in place to appear old.
Yes, I love that. I know you mentioned that to me once offline, and like I was really hoping you would say it on the episode, because I really do love that, and like I've ingrained that into my head, because you're 100% right. Like Adam and Eve were created as clear adults, and we have these other pieces of creation that was just there, and like we don't see this babying of creation in that regard. And so, like, of course, why would God not be at that point? He has every bit of power to be able to create the Grand Canyon that appears to be millions of years old, but it could have been potentially formed within the last 6,000 years, right?
Right. And that's whether or not that is something God did is obviously, even young Earth creationists don't agree on that. A lot of them will say, like, the flood is what created the Grand Canyon. Some will say it's this idea of apparent age. But at least cosmologically, outside of the scope of our Earth, like, that principle has to be true for young Earth creationism to work, just because of the speed of light and, like, how far away. Like, we have seen through like the Hubble telescope and other amazing technological innovations, planets and stars and celestial bodies that are more than 6,000 light years away. Which means if creation was indeed about 6,000 years ago, those things had to be created with some sense of apparent age and with the light that would be traveling to the Earth, like, already in transit. That's so the idea of creating a mature universe is actually kind of the only way young Earth creationism even works, even if you don't buy into that from the perspectives of what's on the Earth. The things outside of the Earth had to be created. Otherwise, if that weren't the case, when we look out in a telescope at things, 10,000 light years away, we would just see blackness, and that's not what we see.
Right. Unless you believe NASA's lying to us, because that's all.
Yeah.
That's also a take that they.
Sure. It's kind of a shame that so many Christians kind of resort to conspiracy theories to make their faith jive, because I don't think you have to. I don't think it's necessary for NASA to be lying to us for young Earth creationism to be viable.
Yeah, and I think it's certainly pessimistic to think that, like, don't get me wrong, the government's shady, but, like,
sure,
at every single corner essentially being like, well, that's a lie, that's a lie, that's a lie, and
I think it's also kind of, like, pessimistic as a Christian to be thinking of, like, NASA found a gotcha, so they got to lie. Like, God didn't go, "Ah, shucks, you outsmarted my creation." God's going to create a universe that does not allow his existence to be disproven. Like,
and that's in the Bible. The very heavens declare, the glory of God, right? Like, you can go out, and I think that's where we get that intelligent design argument from a lot of times. But like to your point, God's not going to create a world that allows for it to be easily disproven or hand waved away. Oh, well, this is just a lie. Here's this elaborate lie that they've been trying to sell us for 50, 60, years at this point. As far, they faked the moon landing and all these pictures from space are fake and yada, yada, yada. And it's like, come on. Like, is the government probably lying to you about stuff? Sure. But, like, are they really lying to you about space? Probably not, and that's something that's almost easily provable. Go buy a telescope,
So this is actually a good time to plug a book that I read recently that was really, really, really good. And it's kind of, like, on this exact topic. Well, it's really more of kind of an inspirational Christian book with, like, loose kind of sciencey side stories. It's written by a megachurch pastor based out of Montana, which, I know megachurches are kind of... His name is Levi Lusko. The book is called The Last Supper on the Moon. The premise of the book is about, like, the idea of the heavens declare the glory of God. And it actually has a lot of really interesting stories, too. Like, Buzz Aldrin took bread and wine up on the lunar lander and had a communion on the moon. Not a lot of people know that. So there has now been, like, communion has been practiced outside of the Earth. How amazing is it that God gave us the ability to observe one of the sacraments of Christianity, not only outside of the realm of our immediate community, but, like, off of our planet?
Yeah, I said amazing.
Yeah, I mean, to be fair, it's a Buzz Aldrin story, and, like, everyone forgets Buzz Aldrin was there because Neil Armstrong got up, and that's a whole other interesting. There's a whole lot of stories behind that, because actually this has nothing to do with the topic. I just think it's a fun story. Normally in like NASA missions, the more senior astronaut would have been the one to get off first, but Buzz Aldrin was really obstinate about wanting it, so NASA gave that to Neil Armstrong instead because Buzz Aldrin was being really immature about wanting it. So, interesting little side story that like because he was very humble about it, Neil Armstrong got to be the one who got all the fame and fortune, which is actually kind of a fun little like, there's some parallels to Christ there too, He preached humbleness and, he's the most well-known historical figure of all time.
Sure.
So I just have a couple other things that aren't on my notes. I'm going to go off script. I just have some fun other topics of conversation that I think could be fun to talk about. I'm sure you've heard about how, like, the book of Job has references that may or may not be to dinosaurs.
Yes, I actually brought that up.
Okay.
Brought it up. My son, he's 8. He asked me if dinosaurs are real. As a parent, that's a very hard. As a parent and as a Christian,
Right.
like it's like, oh, what do I do? Like, but it's like I was like, son, I told him very honestly, it's like I wasn't there. Like, I don't know. But if I look at the Bible, like if I look at the book, a lot of what he's referencing, this behemoth, right? That sounds like a dinosaur.
Right. And the Leviathan too. The Leviathan I think sounds even more like a dinosaur than the behemoth. Like, it talks about the Leviathan breathing fire out of his nostrils. Like, what animal that exists today? Like, I've heard people say, oh, it's a crocodile. Like, show me a crocodile that can breathe fire, and you've shown me the scariest creature that could possibly exist. But a lot of people live in Florida, and there's a lot of crocodiles and alligators there. I would think that if they could breathe fire, some Florida man would have told us by now.
We definitely get some interesting Florida man stories, but fire-breathing crocodiles.
And I've also heard people say, like, oh, the behemoth was probably a hippo. But Job 40, 17 says he stiffens his tail like a cedar tree. I don't know, like, hippos have, like, comically small tails for the size that the animal is. That one little sentence there, to me, kind of, it's almost like it was put in there because God knew people would claim it was a hippo, and he wanted to say, no, it is obviously not a hippo.
Yeah.
Because if there's one thing that a hippo's tail is not like, it's a cedar tree. So I think that could be quote of the day. Hippo tails are not like cedar trees. And let's see, I don't want to take up too much time because we're already obviously running long, but I guess one other kind of thing is the intelligent life on other planets. The question comes up a lot. I get asked this a lot by people who think they're going to get a gotcha is, what if we met intelligent life on other planets? Would they have Jesus? Would they be Christian? And everyone's always disappointed by my answer of, I don't think we're going to find that kind of intelligent life on other planets. Just because of the Bible, God created one species in his image. I don't think we will find humanoid life on other planets. I don't. If I were wrong about that, I feel like it would really kind of shake the faith of a lot of people if we found life resembling humans on other planets. Which is why I don't, as a Christian who believes the Bible is true, that's kind of why I don't think it'll happen. Just because God created one species in his image.
Yeah. And there's this quote. I can't remember exactly who said it, and I'll have to look it up later, but like when asked like is there life out there, right? Like essentially there's two options. Either we are alone in the universe, or we will find life there. Both options are equally terrifying. And I take that to mean essentially, especially as a Christian, it's like either we're alone. Not as a Christian, it's not terrifying. If I were an atheist, right? If we're alone, that means there's nothing else, right? We are literally, it's just us. And then there's all these billions and planets out there, and there's no other life. That is terrifying. Or and that could be terrifying because we don't know what we're going to encounter out there. But as a Christian, I can have confidence in the fact that no, like I really don't think there's other life out there, and that's not terrible because according to my faith that I believe in, I am created in the image of God, and I am uniquely created in the image of God. Like my life is intrinsically more valuable than the animals or even the angels. So that gives me peace of mind. Like if I'm at peace with that because the Bible says I'm created in the image of God. And if we happened by happenstance, right, find other life, I don't think it's gonna look like, even if we did, like, I don't think we will, but even if we did, I don't think it's gonna look humanoid. Like you said, like, it's not gonna look like humans because humans are created in the image of God. They'll look
right, and
like some weird.
And I don't think that life being intelligent is what gives us a soul. I think being created in the image of God is what gives us a soul.
Yeah. Because I mean,
So we could
computers are
find
artificially intelligent.
Right. And like some scientists would even argue that like certain species of like apes and dolphins count as intelligent. But I think under like Christian theology, like they clearly don't have souls. They're clearly not the same thing, which is actually a pretty big disconnect with evolution too, because like evolution would tell you that like large apes and humans are very, very similar. And I mean, I guess we're as similar as any two animals are, but like there's enough differences. Like we're similar in the same way that a horse and a donkey are similar. They're clearly not the same animal. Um,
I always love that. This is one of my favorite jokes. Is like, if we have from monkeys and apes, then why are there still monkey and apes around?
Right. Yeah. So, like, I think the closest thing to humanoid life we would find would be something resembling a monkey or an ape, where it almost looks like a close to human, but it's clearly different. But yeah, I don't necessarily doubt that. I don't say doubt. I do doubt that there's other intelligent life. I don't necessarily dismiss the thought of other intelligent life in the universe. I dismiss the idea of intelligent life that resembles humans in the universe. And realistically, I can't fathom that any like non-believing scientists who takes himself seriously would speculate that when we find intelligent life, if we find it, it will look like us. Because if the secular version of creation is indeed true, and we are just a series of random accidents that happened at exactly the right time when our planet could sustain our life, then to find intelligent life that looks like us, it would have to have happened twice in two different places. So, like, Christianity and secular scientists who take themselves seriously should both be in agreement that we're not going to find intelligent life that looks like humans. And if that intelligent life doesn't look like humans, it's not created in the image of God. Ergo, it doesn't really create a faith problem. They could be incredibly intelligent, but not have the soul. And that doesn't mean they can't have morals or ethics, because even AI can certainly behave like something that has a sense of morals or ethics. So I don't think morals and ethics exist only in creatures that have souls. We can see that on Earth. Even like there's a social order in animals. Certain pack animals in particular have a social order. So they have their own kind of something, a very primitive version of what a human would call a moral or ethical code. So that's like, I think the concept of having a soul and being a creature who is either going to heaven or going to hell just kind of comes down to being like having a soul is more complicated than just being able to say this is a good behavior or this is a bad behavior. I think there's lots of animals know the difference between good and bad. Like a well-trained dog knows the difference between good and bad.
Yeah.
But for spicy conversation, that doesn't necessarily mean that dogs are eligible to go to heaven. And that is not a conversation I am having, because people have opinions on that, and ultimately I don't think that's a primary issue of the faith, and I don't want to go down that, because when you just lost your dog, I can tell you the wrong thing to say to your kid is that dogs don't go to heaven. I don't necessarily think it's impossible that animals go to heaven. Because it does say like the lion will lay with the lamb, and yeah, maybe that's a metaphor, but it also could suggest that lions and lambs exist. Like, I don't know. I view heaven as a place that has everything that I would ever need to be happy, and I sure would like to have my cats. Now, maybe when I'm in heaven, I won't care that I don't have my cats. That's another equally valid theory, but
So I've got a question, and as we kind of wrap up, kind of the closeout, do you think the gap between science and Christianity, any, or
that I think does anything to disprove God? I think obviously Darwin's writings, I think, if you're just looking at it from if you're taking a very primitive approach of it, you might be tempted to say that Darwin's writings are a turn in the scientific community that looks like evidence against God, but Darwin was free to draw whatever conclusions he wanted from what he observed. I certainly don't think anything that Darwin observed does anything to disprove the existence of God. Darwin's theory of the origin of species, as Darwin wrote it, if you're taking word for word, like the word for word contents of his book, The Origin of Species, is not really regarded by the science. It's regarded as the thing that kind of started the study of evolutionary science, but it's not the holy doctrines of evolutionary science anymore. I think the gap is narrowing, but I think there are people both within the realm of Christianity and within the realm of secular science who don't want to see it that way. I think there are a lot of Christians with very, let's say, unrefined theology who just, the world believes this, so I need to reject every single detail of it because I need to be set apart from the world. I don't think that's the right way to take that passage. And I think any Christian who's honestly looking at what science has discovered over the last few hundred years, I don't see a way to make a claim that the gap is widening. There was a time not that long ago when people believed that the Earth was the center of the universe, and the Bible does not say that. In fact, the Bible says that the light and the dark were created first, that all of the celestial bodies outside of the Earth were created first, the stars and the sun. So, the Bible kind of points toward the sun being the center, which the sun obviously isn't the center of the universe, but it's it's kind of the center of our understanding of the universe. So 5, 6, 700. Well, actually, no, that's incorrect. A few thousand years ago, people believed things that the Bible expressly says are not true, that have since been rejected. So, in a lot of ways, kind of the scientific discoveries have pointed towards Christ. And there was a book I checked out from the library in preparation for this, and I don't remember its title or who wrote it. Sure wish I did. But it was basically talking about how every major scientific discovery of the 20th century kind of closes that gap between science and faith. Each chapter is a new major breakthrough in science in the 20th century, and how it points towards God. So, yeah, it was. I didn't read the whole thing. It was mostly because it was really dry. But
research can be dry, but
yeah,
I like what you're saying because that really puts it in perspective. Church, the Christians rather, can contribute scientifically those fields, and it doesn't have to be incompatible. If you believe in any sort of faith, specifically the Christian faith, you have to. Because again, in the modern world, it makes literally no sense. So unless you're Amish or
right.
a Mennonite somewhere where you're you literally are there's no electricity power whatsoever, to where we don't believe in that, in the science of that regard, but then you still believe in science because you're still building, right?
Yeah, and I honestly, I think there's only really one area of science where there's even a hint of disagreement, and that's kind of origin of the universe theory. Honestly, in terms of what we are doing with science today, what is the application of knowing the origins? That doesn't help us develop a new supercomputer or invent a new medicine. So Christians shouldn't distance themselves from science because there are contributions to be made, and even the things that we don't agree on aren't going to affect like the things that you might do that could help further humanity. So I think Christians should be encouraged to pursue the sciences, even with the understanding that there might be a little bit of ostracization that happens within the scientific community because of being a Christian. But that's no different than any other field, really. I mean, that's just something that the Bible tells us is going to happen to us. Is there's going to be some level of ostracization. It's easy to forget that because realistically, like I know there's a lot of doom and gloom and like there's a lot of doom and gloom around like being a Christian in the modern age, but really, honestly and truly, the 20th and 21st century United States of America is probably the easiest place in the scope of human history to be a Christian.
Yes, I would. I mean, one, the country was
just freedom to practice your religion. Is that where you were going?
Yes. Like founded on the free. So like I feel like because the Bible does say there's going to be persecution. There's a lot where Americans within seat of privilege look at inconveniences as persecution.
Right.
And it's like that's not really the same thing. Like you're still free to practice, you're free to gather. Like there's a lot of things in that you have that some other countries, not even talking about third world countries, but literally some other first world countries don't have the same freedoms that you do. And so there's a grain of salt you definitely have to take there, to where it's definitely the easiest place to be a Christian because you have all this technology, you have all of this theological framework that's been set by the people. You can read all of these books. You can read the text or the scriptures. You can read all this stuff, and you can form an opinion, and you can stand on that opinion very boldly on just about any street corner in America. And you can start a YouTube page, you can start a Facebook about whatever very freely, right? Not to say that you're wrong or right or whatever, but you can make your point and stick to it from a place of relative comfort and ease in America versus any other place. And a lot of because one of science and a lot of the technological breakthroughs that are, and to bring it back, to the subject, the technological things that we have because of the science. So it's not incompatible with our faith. It's a tool, and a tool is right nor wrong. It's a tool, and it's really based on.
In fact, particularly in like technology and in my wheelhouse, computer science and that kind of stuff, it has never been easier to do the Great Commission. It has never been easy to go into all the world and teach all nations because you can do that now without even leaving your living room. And like how many preachers are there who have YouTube channels that have a reach all around the world? I mean, for better or for worse. The flip side of that is you got to be careful and make sure that you are well grounded in your faith and that you know what you're talking about, because it's also never been easier to spread heresy, even if you don't do it on purpose. But yeah, I mean, we definitely should be embracing science and technology because it gives us this throughout history unparalleled access. We can share the gospel to people in places where it's illegal to share the gospel and do it safely because we have the internet. Like, because the internet exists, they can't keep Christianity out of places like China. And the only place that's had any kind of success keeping the influence of the internet out is North Korea, and they have done that by rejecting all technology and not allowing the internet within their walls. So China, to some extent, they heavily filter the internet, but like it's not always successful. But like the only way that North Korea was able to stop Western ideals and Christianity being part of that from entering the country is to completely bar their people access to modern technology.
Yeah, and we got to stop that for long. It's gonna come like a flood once the technological barrier is broken. Like it's going to be
So yeah, I mean, science and technology have made it be there's really never been an easier time to be a Christian. And for people in places where it's illegal to be Christian, like you have some technology-based options where like if some hostile military was ransacking your home, like you don't have to have a paper Bible that's going to give you away as a practicing Christian anymore. So technology has also enabled people in places where it's not so safe to be a Christian to be a Christian somewhat safely. Yeah, Christians really, really ought to embrace the sciences, and particularly technology, because of the historically unparalleled access to the world that it gives us. Now, I mean, there are dangers too, and that's a topic for itself. Like, there's also a lot of bad stuff on the internet. Now we have this new challenge of keeping that stuff away from our kids. But ultimately, I think that's kind of a small price to pay to have to figure that out in exchange for being able to spread the gospel so easily.
I agree. Yeah, I think the silver lining of it, and like I said, the internet's a tool, and it's based on whoever's hands it's in. So if we put the internet in the hands of Christians, we're going to make every honest attempt to spread the gospel, to fulfill the mission, to put that information out there. Their Hebrew, right, as best as we can, right? So you can see those original, and then you can get that translated into whatever you currently speak, and be able to say. So it's no longer like, oh, which is the ESV better or the CSB, and how does that compare to the KJV, right? There's no longer this argument. We can go to the original, Greek and Hebrew text, and then go. So this is what was actually disseminated back in those times. This is what they, determined to be the Holy Scriptures back in those times. And we can have, within 99% certainty that this is what it is, and this is the intention, and be able to spread that and have that conversation. So I definitely agree with you there that Christians should not shy away from the sciences in those fields, and we should make every effort to recognize those things, especially when matters that aren't core tenets of Christianity, those salvific issues. To your point of saying that the main is origin, and if we are believing Christians, then we believe our origin is in the Bible, and we are made in the image of God based on that creation. Now, again, there's healthy debate that can be for the exact timeline issue. There's no reason to reject the sciences, to throw the baby out with the bathwater, and fully reject anything and everything that science tries to or tell us to health and technology, other scientific breakthroughs that we're making. There's no reason to reject those. So final thoughts within the next, last 5 minutes.
I think it's just God created us with this inquisitive mind, wants to know about the world and the universe around us. I think Christians should be discouraged from stifling that characteristic, that curiosity that is a gift from God. God wants to see his creation. He wants to show the heavens proclaim his glory. So I think we need to first kind of tear down this starting point that a lot of Christians have of creation and evolution are at odds. Therefore, there is a conflict. I think there's a temptation to take that as a starting point, and then from there we end up with a rejection. I think we need to understand why we believe what we do, and then from there use that innate curiosity that the Lord blessed us with to try to find all of the little pieces of evidence he left for us to show off his creation. No matter what the gift is, if God gives us a gift, we shouldn't be squandering it. And that also goes to our our curiosity about the world around us that we all have.
I think one of the final things I'll say is that, like, whenever my kids, people are gonna get mad, like, but whenever my kids ask me a stupid question, one of the first things I say is, God gave you a brain. I need you to use it. It's like, take a minute to think about it, you know. First, it's been a pleasure. Thank you for coming out and having this conversation. I loved it. I'm going to talk about these different topics and things like that. I loved having you on here and just it's not about really finding the right or wrong answer, but just having this discussion. And I think
it's that human curiosity, right, that I was talking about. We want to have these conversations. So yeah, it was a blast. I always enjoy talking about this stuff. I have my own long list of like kind of pet issues within the faith that I enjoy talking about, and this is one of them. So yeah.
We'll get the next one on the list next time. All right. Well, for those who tuned in, thank you for tuning in to Let's Talk About It.